In A Song of Ice and Fire, there is a lot of animosity between the Martells of Dorne and the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, which stems from the unfortunate circumstances of Elia Martell. Elia was the wife of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, and when he lost at the Trident, she and her children were killed by Gregor Clegane when Tywin attacked the city of King's Landing for Robert Baratheon. But once upon a time, there was a possibility that her life could have gone in a very different direction. When she was younger, her mother was actually friends with Joanna Lannister, the wife of Tywin and mother of Jaime, Cersei, and Tyrion. She visited Casterly Rock sometime after the death of Joanna and the birth of Tyrion. She wanted a marriage pact with the Lannisters and asked Tywin for a match with either Cersei marrying Oberyn or Jaime marrying Elia. Tywin refused both matches and offered Tyrion instead, which Elia's mother was not pleased with. But what if Tywin had actually accepted her proposal for his son and heir? How would the story change if the daughter of Dorne married a lion instead of a dragon? Before we get into that, let's talk about why they didn't get approved in the first place. In the case of Cersei, it's a no-brainer. Tywin was planning to make her queen and marry her off to Prince Rhaegar. In comparison, a second son like Oberyn with nothing to his name is an obvious step down from the crown prince of the realm. In Jaime's case, it's a bit more unclear. Tywin didn't seem to have any big plans for Jaime outside of him inheriting Casterly Rock one day, and he planned to marry him off to Lysa Tully years later. My working theory as to why he turned Elia down is nothing to do with status, but prejudice. Dorne and the Martells, despite being very high profile and powerful, are often looked down on by the rest of the kingdoms and seen as inferior. King Eris didn't even like to hold his granddaughter Rhaenys because, by his words, she even smelled Dornish. So the simple answer is that he just saw Dorne and the Martells as beneath him and unworthy of his son. So what's a plausible reason that we can come up with to make Tywin changing his mind make sense? Well, I think I have an idea, which I'll be borrowing from a similar video I made in the past, for a similar topic to this one. The video in question being my What If Cersei Lannister Married Oberyn Martell. Feel free to check that video out if you haven't already. Basically, the way I went about Tywin reasonably agreeing to a Martell match is through his wife, Joanna, by having her live a bit longer than she did in canon and delaying the birth of Tyrion. She'll still die eventually, but having her around could have an effect on Tywin's decision-making. Joanna is a very important character in Tywin's life. People often say that she is the only one who knew Tywin Lannister beneath all the armor, that she was the love of his life and the only one who could make him smile. Her death seemed to take all the joy out of Tywin. So by having her live longer, this could affect Tywin when it comes to marrying off his son. She could soften him up to the idea over time, since she is friends with the mother of Elia. Not to mention, her being able to convince Tywin to marry off Jaime makes more sense than him letting go of Cersei. Tywin had plans to make Cersei queen, so it's obvious why he would turn down Oberyn. But Jaime is heir to Casterly Rock, and as I said earlier, Tywin doesn't seem to have too many plans for him outside of Casterly Rock. He's not planning to make him a monarch, and the Martells are still a very high-profile family despite all the prejudice, and he isn't really losing anything by marrying Jaime off to Elia. So I would say with his wife around and Tywin being a much happier person as a result, and then having Joanna softening him up to the idea over time, he does accept the match, since he lacks a grand design for his son that he has for his daughter. So Jaime is set up to marry Elia Martell, and this would change a lot in the story. For starters, if Elia eventually marries Jaime, then Prince Rhaegar loses out on a wife, and his two children, Aegon and Rhaenys, will no longer exist. And if young Griff in the books is really the son of Elia and Rhaegar that Varys somehow managed to save, and not some Blackfire pretender, then he's gone too and his storyline is also erased. I think Jaime and Elia wouldn't be a bad match, to be honest. Jaime in his youth was a pretty stand-up guy. He was nice, he was honorable and respectful, and that's how he would treat Elia, who is also very kind, and I see her taken to Jaime fairly easily, though there would be an issue in the form of Cersei. As we know, Cersei and Jaime have had a relationship for years since they were younger, and she doesn't like when people get too close to Jaime. I mean, in the books, she convinces Jaime to join the Kingsguard because she doesn't want him to marry Lysa Tully, and she's convinced that she'll marry Prince Rhaegar, so in her mind, it's the perfect way to always keep him around and bound to her. She also might have killed one of her friends for Jaime too, her childhood friend, Malara, Joanna died after being pushed down a well. It's suspected that Cersei killed her after getting a prophecy from Maggie the Frog. There are varying reasons as to why she killed her. Some say it was because she didn't want the prophecy to spread. Others say it was jealousy because Melara wanted to marry Jaime. It could have been both, to be honest. But if Cersei is that possessive of her younger brother, that does spell bad news for Elia Martell. Elia will likely foster a Castle Rock with the Lannisters after the engagement between her and Jaime was set, so she can learn and get used to life there. Jaime would be polite, but Cersei would be standoffish and often making petty little remarks towards Elia. But I don't see Elia really rising towards her japes and jabs. One important thing to note here is that Elia is about 9 to 10 years older than Jaime and Cersei, so she'll be in the betrothal phase for a while, and because Cersei is little more than a child to her in comparison, I don't see Elia really taking her that seriously. And Elia won't have to deal with Cersei for too long because eventually, when she's older, she'll be taken to court by Tywin so he can go through with his plan to marry her off to Prince Rhaegar. Like canon, he'll be turned down by the Mad King, and after the defiance of Duskendale, Eris will set off to find a wife for his son, Prince Rhaegar. Now, this is where things get important and very interesting. Eris wanted Rhaegar to have a Valyrian wife, and sent his cousin, Steffon Baratheon, to look for one in Essos, but he failed to find one, and ultimately died on his way back home from his last voyage. This would still happen in this timeline, but what comes after it? Not so much. Because Eris wanted someone of Valyrian ancestry for his son, he settled on Elia Martell, because one of her ancestors was actually a Targaryen princess. But since she's going to be married to Jaime, what can he do now? I suppose you could argue that since Elia would still be betrothed to Jaime and nothing was really set in stone, if he was really set on a Valyrian match, he could try to force Tywin to break the betrothal so he could get her for Rhaegar. But I'm actually gonna say that is not what happens, since the topic of this video is her getting married to Jaime, after all. The way I would make Eris not forcing the marriage make sense is through his disdain of Tywin Lannister and his pre-existing prejudice of Dorne. Eris' distrust of Tywin grew every year, so with the knowledge that the Dornish got in bed with him through a betrothal, he wouldn't trust Elia to be with his son. He'd think her time with the Lions have tainted her in some way, made her unworthy of Rhaegar, and is therefore suspicious. And to top it all off, he already looks down on the Dornish, so for them to get in bed with the house that he sees as nothing more than servants, he definitely wouldn't want anything to do with her, Targaryen blood or no. So what does Eris do in the absence of a bride? Are there any other candidates? There are Valyrian families in Westeros, like the Velaryons and the Celtigars. In the case of House Velaryon, they've even intermarried with House Targaryen for generations, even before they conquered Westeros, and they resemble them the most. In the books, Cersei thinks that this guy named Orain Waters, a Velaryon bastard, looks just like Rhaegar Targaryen. But the reason he didn't go for the Velaryons or Celtigars in canon for wives for his son is likely the same reason he didn't go with House Baratheon. House Baratheon is probably the closest in relation to House Targaryen at this point, since the mother of Steffon Baratheon, the father of Robert, Stannis, and Renly, was a Targaryen princess. Realistically, if ancestry was what Eris was after, then they would have been a great choice. But the only thing is, there were no Baratheon women available. Only men. This is likely what happened with the Velaryons and the Celtigars. Either the women were already married, too young, or just straight up non-existent to even be considered. That being said, does Eris just give up, cave on a Cersei match, or just give Rhaegar full authority over his own marriage? I don't think so. After searching endlessly to no avail for a wife for his son and heir, Eris eventually lands on a potential candidate, a family that could meet his needs. The Daynes of Starfall are an interesting family in the books. This is the family of Sir Arthur Dayne, the people who made his sword dawn out of a fallen star. But most importantly, despite not having any Valyrian ancestry that we know of, some of the Daynes in the books actually have white hair and purple eyes, like Targaryens. They could reasonably pass for Valyrians and give Eris another option outside of Cersei. Through Arthur Dayne, who is a member of his Kingsguard, Eris would broker a deal with his family to marry his son Rhaegar to Arthur's sister, Ashara. Ashara is a very beautiful and mysterious woman in the books. She has purple eyes and is rumored to be the mother of Jon Snow, since Ned had a crush on her in the books, and it's even said that the Stark dishonored her at Harrenhal in some way. She also took her own life after the rebellion, for reasons that vary based on rumors. If Eris is so hung up on the Valyrian ancestry, maybe a family that has the attributes and available women would do the trick instead if he has no other alternative. Not to mention, Eris is actually related to the Daynes. His great-grandfather Mycor married a Dayne. So you could argue that he is doing the Targaryen thing and keeping it in the family somewhat. Now in this timeline, Ashara Dayne goes from being a mystery to being a future queen once Rhaegar takes the throne. That being said, what are some other changes that we can see in this timeline? I would say Jaime eventually gets married to Elia when he turns about 15, since marriages happen pretty young in this world. I don't see him joining the Kingsguard in this timeline since he's already married by that point, and it defeats the purpose of the video topic. Next, when it comes to the rebellion, that all depends on how successful the marriage is between Ashara and Rhaegar. In the books, it is rumored that she had a stillborn daughter before she died. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she'll only have stillborn kids or have difficulty giving birth like Elia did. If things go well, maybe through trial and error, but Rhaegar still manages to have 3 kids with Aegon, Rhaenys, and possibly a Visenya, since he looked like he was trying to recreate the Targaryen trinity that founded the dynasty, then this eliminates the rebellion, as he won't feel the need to go after Lyanna Stark. Despite the implications that came from them eloping and the birth of Jon Snow, a song of ice and fire, a son of ice and fire, since Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen both come from houses of ice and fire, the only real reason he went after her, it seems to me, is because Elia couldn't have any more kids. Her 2 kids, Aegon and Rhaenys, almost killed her, and if Rhaegar really believed that the dragon needed 3 heads, 3 children, then he kind of felt like he had to go after Lyanna. But if that's not the case here and he gets what he wants, Lyanna isn't taken. Rickard and Brandon aren't killed trying to get her back, so Brandon can go on and marry Catelyn Tully instead of Ned. Eris won't ask for the heads of Ned and Robert, which forces Jon Arryn to act either. Tywin also stays his hand of the king to Eris since he never made Jaime a part of the Kingsguard. But with no rebellion, this does mean that Eris stays in power a bit longer. But if the rumors that Rhaegar was planning to overthrow his father are true, it won't be for long. Rhaegar would likely work with Tywin, who was sick of Eris' shenanigans, and Arthur Dayne, whose sister he married, to depose King Eris and make Rhaegar the new king. Or regent, if Rhaegar was just planning to imprison him instead of kill him, since kinslaying is seen as pretty bad in Westeros. So with that disaster averted, we enter a time of peace. But there are still some other questions here, like what happens to Cersei? If she doesn't marry Rhaegar or can't marry Rhaegar since he never took the throne, who does she end up with? In the books, Jaime says that Tywin kept Cersei at court even after Rhaegar married Elia. He thinks he was still hoping for a Targaryen match. Should Rhaegar's wife die in childbirth, or maybe he wanted her to marry Prince Viserys. If a Targaryen match is what Tywin wants and asks for from Rhaegar, citing Eris' refusal of his match despite the fact that they were friends for so long, I could see Rhaegar being willing to marry off his little brother Viserys to Cersei, especially if Tywin helped him depose his mad father. I think Tywin would go for this since when Cersei and Viserys do have kids eventually, he could have those kids marry the children of Elia and Jaime, or Rhaegar and Ashara. Either way, he's kinda winning something here, and gets a step up in society. Or at least, that's what I think would happen in this possible timeline. You may feel differently since anything can happen in these hypothetical scenarios. So you guys tell me your thoughts down below and what changes you think would have made sense. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more, and I will see you all next time.